Hello, today we are going to do bookshelf tour number 3. 1, 2, 3. First, let's just take notice of the decorations. Here we have some origami. Here we have a little bear. Let's look at the books, shall we? Right, we've got this from Lawrence Durrell. Lawrence Durrell, I think everybody knows, wrote the Alexandria Quartet and is one of my favorite things of all time. I really do quite hesitate to read anything else by Lawrence Durrell because I'm just worried that it's going to not be as good as the Alexandria Quartet. Like, I don't see how it possibly could be. So I'm really, I've had this book for years and I've been putting it off and putting it off. Every time I see this book, I think, God, I have to read that quickly. I've been just dying to read this book, but for some reason it just never comes to hand when I need it. The Book of Ebenezer LePage by G.B. Edwards, and a quote from William Golding, who will also be seen today on the shelf. To read it is not like reading, but living. Stubborn, reactionary, and oddly vulnerable, Ebenezer is a Guernsey man through and through. For him, the smell of the sea, the tomatoes, and his hatred of Jersey make up the stuff of existence. His long life, bounded by rocks and water and rooted in tradition, sees the destruction of the old ways. Wow. And also from John Fowles, who we'll be seeing on the shelf today. John Fowles. There may have been stranger recent literary events than the book you are about to read, but I rather doubt it. And that is very inspiring, coming from someone who wrote the strange books that John Fowles wrote. Why don't I read this? I know I will love it. And I know that it will be one of those amazing books that life-changing, but somehow maybe it's just too far out over here in the corner and I just don't see it for some reason. Silence by Shusaku Endo. I did a big review of this 2 years ago and there's a link here to that review. It's pretty good. The review, I mean. The book is incredible and you should read the book. Shusaku Endo was a Japanese Catholic, which is extremely rare because Catholicism, Christianity was prohibited, like violently and vigorously prohibited for centuries in Japan. It's not a common thing. So yeah, so it's good to read their books to understand, you know, this very unusual way of thinking for Japanese people. Patreon. For $5 a month, you can get into my book magazine book lottery. And, you know, I think that's a nice thing to support. Anyway, if you want to support me on Patreon, you can. If you don't want to, I don't, you know. I'm making this video right after I made the video of this one because I'm going to have to mail this to Mike, who won this in the Patreon book magazine lottery raffle. And soon this book will go off to other places. Because that's the nice thing about books, is they really travel. Euripides, Medea, and other plays. Did I only read Medea or did I actually read the other plays? I only read Medea. Medea is an ancient Greek tragedy. It's really quite good. It's very bloody. I think it's kind of popular today because it's really, you know, hard on the feminism and the role of women. It's good, but very bloody. The Drinker by Hans Fallada. Man, I was so happy to read this book. The heart of alcoholism. You know, the alcoholic who is just incapable of not drinking. Sacrifice anything. Just go to the absolute limits of humanity to get another drink. It's frightening. Terrible, terrible sickness. But such a good book though. If you're not an alcoholic and you're interested in learning about how it feels to be one, this is the book to read. If you are an alcoholic and you know exactly how it feels to be one, maybe this is also fun to read because you can say to yourself, well, at least I'm not as bad as that guy. Because it gets pretty bleak at the end. What have we got here? The Unvanquished by William Faulkner. Set in Mississippi during the Civil War and Reconstruction, Faulkner's 10th book, The Unvanquished, focuses on the Sartoris family. Faulkner. Surprising I've only got one Faulkner on my shelf because I do enjoy Faulkner very much. Not easy to read, but always deeply rewarding. And I've got these 2 books by F. Scott Fitzgerald. I've got Mr. Gatsby, and I've got Tender as the Night. I've read Gatsby 3 times, and I picked this up because I know that I'm going to have to read it again for the next semester at university. Am I happy to read Gatsby again? No, not really. The last time I read it, I felt that was I've got it. I really got it after 3 readings. Oh well, but at university, who knows? Maybe they're going to say something. It's just so hard to sit there at university and listen to the bullshit that I've heard in a high school class. I read this book in grade 10, high school, grade 10. I think I was 14 years old, and we read Gatsby, and the teacher went on about the East Egg and the West Egg and the old money and the new money, and about Jay Gatsby is a bootlegger and he's the new money, and the green light at the end of the dock, and he knocks the clock off and he catches the clock as if to freeze time, because that's what Gatsby's trying to do. And if I have to listen to that same shit again in a 3rd-year university class, like, think about it. Like, the distance between a 14-year-old in grade 10 and a 3rd-year university student is what? It's like 7 years difference, which would be 50% of a 14-year-old's life. Still talking about fucking Gatsby, like it's the only book that was written in the 20th century. I got so disgusted with university professors teaching the same shit again and again and again because they've got no new ideas and they're too lazy to read any new books. Jesus Christ, university professors, get some new material. Like, you would imagine that English literature just came to a dead standstill at 1935 and that nothing has been published since then. All of you lazy professors and your goddamn Jane Austen and your goddamn James Joyce and your goddamn fucking Virginia Woolf over and over and over in endless, disgusting perpetuity. Get some new material. I don't hate university, but I am really quickly learning to hate English literature professors because they've got nothing new to say. Really, guys. You know, like, just a university professors, like, so many of them are so goddamn pompous. Like, they have this inflated, like, you know, oh, I'm the professor and you're just the lowly students. A university English literature professor, like, is one of the most worthless citizens in society. You produce nothing. You add nothing to the world. In fact, you are even a hindrance because of all the paper that is being produced to write all of these fucking essays that mean nothing. So, in fact, you're detracting from the environment. University professors, really, you need to learn to do a much better job, because endlessly speaking about The Great Gatsby, Portrait of the Artist of the Young Man, and Mrs. Dalloway over and over and over again. You people, you make me sick. I have no respect for university professors. Only those professors who have tried to go deep into the literature and to discover something that is not common, common. That's all, not something common. Like the university professors who, go deep into Shakespeare and Christopher Marlowe and, the romantic poets, the Elizabethan poets. Like those people who went in and they tried to forge a little bit of new territory into literature, which is not so just disgustingly common. You university teachers who are teaching Dalloway and The Great Gatsby, it's like, when you turn on the television and there's always some episode of The Simpsons or Cheers or MASH. It's just this endless cycle of, the same shit. I really enjoyed reading this one, though. And I'm looking forward to reading this one again. Because, again, unlike this one that is not repetitively taught to the point of disgust, this one is really rarely read or even spoken about. And it's very good. And it's more reflective of Scott Fitzgerald's life, about alcoholism and this marriage he made to Zelda Fitzgerald. And there's a scene in this book where a man is water skiing and he's trying to carry another man on his shoulders, I guess, with his legs here, while water skiing. And it just boggles my mind, like, imagine how strong you would have to be to carry another man on your back while water skiing. And I've always remembered that about this book, this scene where we have this water skiing scene. Woo. Madame Bovary by Gustave Flaubert. Something that is no university professor that I know of teaches this. This is really turning it into how much I hate university professors video. I just think if you're going to teach English literature at university, you should be able to show young university students a handful of books that they've never heard of which will inspire them in some manner. You can't do Catcher in the Rye. Catcher in the Rye is too typical. But you can do Last Exit to Brooklyn. I don't know why I put those two together in my mind, but if you were to teach Last Exit to Brooklyn, well, good luck to you, but at least you are trying to show people some literature which deserves more attention. Great Gatsby, nobody needs to teach that ever again. Mrs. Dalloway, nobody needs to teach that ever again. Like, what about Winesburg, Ohio by Sherwood Anderson? No one's teaching that. At least not at my Mickey Mouse school. But there's a book which really is just crying out for attention. Like, there's a book that you can give to students and it has something, like, it's a beautiful book. Madame Bovary. Man, this video is going to be hard to edit. Gustave Flaubert. I put off reading this one for a long time, even though I know it's on, there's a list out there, David Bowie's favorite books. And this was really high on his list, and it always, you know, I was always curious, like, wow, David Bowie thinks Madame Bovary is such a great novel. I've got to read that. But I didn't for a long time because I always thought it would be so boring. Wonderful book. It's about a woman who marries a local doctor in a village, and she's happy. She's got everything she could possibly want, but she's not happy, and she decides to have an affair because she's got everything she wants. Well, what happens when you get everything that you want? Well, you suddenly might discover that you want something a little bit extra on this side, and it destroys your life. Oh, this is a strange one. Independence Day by Richard Ford, winner of the Pulitzer Prize. Take note, Americans. This is a strange one because it's the sequel to something. I believe this is the sequel to The Sports Writer. Yeah, in this visionary sequel to The Sports Writer. And I know that The Sports Writer is a book that needs to be read. Like, it's on one of my lists of great novels to read. So I've got this one, but I can't read this one until I've read The Sports Writer. I mean, you can't read the sequel before the original, because then, you know, you'll be all messed up when you read the original. So I've got this, but I can't read it until I find a copy of The Sports Writer. I don't really like this edition. It's so, I don't know, commercially ugly. John Fowles, who thinks so highly of Ebenezer LePage, the Magus. Oh, with these blue pages. Love it, love it, love it. I love those blue pages. Blue or yellow or red. Man, why did they ever stop doing that? Maybe it's kitsch, but, you know, sometimes kitsch, that's why it's kitsch, because people they love it. So strange. Like, after 50 pages, I thought, okay, all right, that's a couple of twists and turns. Now we're just gonna, you know, we're gonna coast on those twists and turns, and then, you know, it will settle down after that. And like, this is a long book. This is 650 pages. And then at 300 pages, I thought, okay, all right. Like, that is more twists and turns than normally I would encounter in 1 year's worth of reading in one single book. Now it's gonna settle down and no more of this wild, crazy shenanigans. Twists and turns to the very last page of the novel. It is unbelievable how strange it keeps getting. Very much worth reading. I really responded to this book right at the very beginning because it's about a young man. I think in the first couple of pages, he talks about how when he was a teenager, both of his parents are dead. And he says something along the lines of, to be a teenager with 2 dead parents is one of the greatest gifts that anyone could be given. That sentiment really resonated within me. I thought, oh God, you lucky bastard, no parents as a teenager? That is just, imagine the life of freedom. You know, of course, troubled and full of mistakes and errors and, you know, lacking in, you know, parental authority. But think how the freedom you would have not to have these old people hanging around in the closet all the time, just constantly. The phone calls and the emails and the cards and all of the familial requirements. I thought bookshelf number 3 was going to be boring, but I'm really wound up today. I drank too much coffee. Max Frisch, I'm Not Stiller. And I can't wait to read it. It's just that I've just bought it and I've got books on my shelf that have been sitting here for years and years and years. For example, Constance. Like, that book has been sitting there for at least 7 years. So why do I have these moral compunctions? So I only bought this book 6 months ago. So I feel bad about reading this book before reading that book and Ebenezer LePage, because those books have been standing, waiting for my attention longer than this one has. But, you know, this one's got this funny cover, so I want to read that one. And it looks like it's really good. I just talked about this recently, so I don't want to talk about it too much. William Golding, who was mentioned in Ebenezer LePage. We've got, what have we got? The Inheritors. and The Pyramid, with someone who looks very much like Trump on the cover. Doesn't that look like Trump a little bit? We all know William Golding wrote Lord of the Flies. I've never read anything but Lord of the Flies, and I think that a lot of people are in that same boat that I'm in, that we've all read Lord of the Flies, but nothing else from William Golding. But apparently some of his other books are really quite noteworthy. One day I will read those, if I live long enough. Ferdy Durkee by Gombrowicz. This was a big disappointment. I thought this book was totally, completely stupid, but I thought that I ought to read it again. But I thought it was so ridiculous, and you know, there's too absurd. Like, you can only push things to a degree of absurdity where people are still willing to read what you're writing. That novel, The Life of Pi, is kind of absurd, but people are willing to go along with it because it's on the edge of what is tolerable in terms of absurdity. But this, to me, is not. Like, it's too ridiculous, and I thought it was completely stupid. But I'll read it again just to make sure. I also read The Life of Pi a second time because I also felt it was like, is that really as good as everybody thought it was? Because I didn't like it. And then when I read it the second time, I was sure, like, yes, no, it's just a popular bullshit thing. The Life of Pi is really not. It's not as good as everybody thinks it is. The Wind in the Willows. I've never read this, and I know that it is like one of the absolute foundations that children's literature is built upon. There are some books that children should have read to them by their parents. You know, Charlotte's Web, Black Beauty, and this one, The Wind in the Willows. And I cannot believe that I have never read this. So I have a 10-month-old son. His name is Matthew, and I will read this to him one day, and we will both hopefully enjoy it together. We've got some Graham Greene. I like Graham Greene quite a lot, and there is a lot of novels by Graham Greene to enjoy. And these are two that I've never even read. And I've read a fair bit of Graham Greene. My favorite is still The End of the Affair. That is my favorite. What's that one in Africa? The Heart of the Matter. I enjoyed that one. And what else have I read by Graham Greene? Was he a spy, or did he write about spy stuff? There was that spy story he wrote about the man who was married to the African woman working at the MI6. That was just okay. You know, that was more of a James Bond kind of a novel. So here we've got Our Man in Havana. That's going to be something really good. And I love those old penguins with the teal spines. And I love these penguins too, with these sort of, you know, cheap watercolors on the cover. You know, The Ministry of Fear. God, Penguin, they do a really good job. Well, do they do a good job? Well, in retrospect, you know, to pick up something like this, you know, like, it just fills me with that sense of nostalgia that, yeah, you know, penguins used to look like that with the orange spine, and these ones too with the teal, and just this, the black and white with that little letterbox. Patrick Hamilton, The Slaves of Solitude, so good. Like, just, you know, some books are just like delicious, and this is one of them. I did a review of it. You can check out that review up here. Please go and check the review. Come back and get the rest of the tour, but watch this one. This is such a good book. Really go and find this book because it's a joy to read. It's about a woman during the Second World War. She leaves London because of the Blitz, and she goes to live in a rooming house somewhere close to Wimbledon, I think, somewhere on the Thames. And, you know, about the conflict she has with the people in the rooming house. It is just, magnifique. Gonna get some strange ones now. Raisin in the Sun, I had to read that for university. Did I like it? No, I thought it was so easy. You know, like it was so paint by the numbers, kind of like it's a play. And it just, black family, oh, we're black. Goddamn, life's so hard for the black man in America these days. Living in this goddamn black neighborhood in Chicago where you just don't have a hope. We're gonna buy a house in the white neighborhood. Oh, but they're gonna hate us in the white neighborhood. But, you know, we're moving on up to the east side. Like, there were no surprises in this book at all. Even the, will they move to the white neighborhood? Won't they move to the white neighborhood? Even that decision in the end of the book was just, it was very common. I just thought it was sort of run of the mill. Scarlet Letter. I picked this up in the charity shop for $1. because I thought I would have to read it at university. Luckily, I have not been made to read this at university yet. I've only got 2 semesters left. Somehow I feel that it will pop up, but maybe it will, maybe it won't. Here's a Canadian thing. In Canada, we have a playwright called Thompson Highway, and he's an Indigenous man. Do we have a photo? Yeah, there we go, we have a photo. Nice black and white artistic photo there. Thompson Highway was born on his father's trap line. What the hell does that mean? Who knows? On a remote island on Maria Lake, away up in northern Manitoba. You couldn't be more fanciful, could you? Where it meets the borders of Saskatchewan and the Northwest Territories. Maria Lake is about 100 miles north of the reserve. He's an Indigenous man, and he wrote some plays. And again, when I was a high school student, they were pretty popular because it was a novelty that someone from the reservation was writing plays about that subject. And I want to read it again because I remember it fondly. It was a little bit aggressive, like in its hatred of Canada and, oh, look what they've done to us. But I guess Canada deserves that reaction after everything that Canada has done to the Indigenous people. It's just that, it was really quite obviously, oh, the persecution we've endured. Okay, but somebody has to write those plays, right? I mean, someone needs to be the voice of that anger and animosity and anti-Canadian sentiment. Like, we do need those writers to speak out against, the history of this country, because Canadian people are so goddamn self-satisfied and complacent. We need someone to criticize them and say, hey, guess what? Canadian people, you're not all as nice as you think you are. So stop being so goddamn smug all the time. Fucking smug Canadians. Smug, self-satisfied, always. That's a Canadian smile where you try to stretch your... Now I've got some books of poetry from my friend Alan Hill. We Came From Water by Alan Hill. In the Blood, his latest collection of poems by Alan Hill. The Narrow Road to the Far West by Alan Hill. He's a friend of mine. He lives in New Westminster and he writes poetry, and his poetry is good. Yeah, and I'm happy to have these. He gave them all to me, which was nice of him. There he is. Look at his happy face there. The one thing about my friend Alan Hill is that he doesn't read the books that I lend him. I'm so annoyed sometimes with Alan because I lent him my copy of Moon Tiger, which is a book I love, and every time I go over to visit him in his house, I see it lying around. It's getting more and more battered every time I see it. Like, it's really looking like he's kicked it around his house. Every time I say, Alan, have you read this yet? He says, oh, no, I haven't read that yet, but I will read it. I will read it. Alan, read the books I lend. And he lends me like some really, like, he lent me this collection of short stories by Saul Bellow, which was good, but it was, sometimes Saul Bellow is like, you just need to pry the sentences apart with a fork. They're just so densely packed. And Moon Tiger is, it's something you could read in 2 or 3 days. I mean, it's such an easy and great book to read. Anyway, so, it's like if you have a friend that you loan books to and that friend of yours doesn't read the books you lend him, he's still my friend though. Homer, the Iliad, I've never read it. All right, the baby wants to come out of the room, so I got to go quickly. The Kite Runner, I've never read this. It's so popular, I don't really want to read it because I kind of feel that it's not going to be all it's cracked up to be because it's just so popular. Probably just because they made a film. Probably everybody's watched the film and nobody's read the book. And the book is probably good. It's just that I'm Generation X. If something is so widely, universally acclaimed to be good, then I kind of think it's not going to be that good. Welbeck, Lanzarote. Looks, I don't know, looks like it's going to be so stupid, but at least it's very, very short. Oh God, it's only going to take about 30 minutes to read with, like, look how big that is. Like, look at that. I mean, those margins are so big you could land an airplane in them. I don't know. I've never read any Welbeck, and this is probably, doesn't look like a very good place to start. No, here's another one. The Map and the Territory by Michel Welbeck. At least that one is substantial now, right? 270 pages. That's a nice edition. The baby's laughing in the other room. I've never read any Welbeck. I know that, the guy that has over 100,000 YouTube subscribers thinks that he's really some hot shit, but I don't know. It looks a little bit kind of that, you know, French philosophical pretentious, but who knows? Maybe it will surprise me. You know, like that guy who does, you know, the big YouTuber, like he's got good taste most of the time. Sometimes I think he's a little bit influenced by the publishing companies. Maybe, perhaps, why not? I mean, if a publishing company said, we'll give you $5,000 to make a video on this, but we want you to love it, man, for $5,000, I'd love it. I'm not saying he did that, and I'm not even insinuating it. I'm just saying that if it were ever to occur, I used to work as a bartender, so in terms of, you know, dancing around like a monkey for money, I've done that. Victor Hugo, The Hunchback of Notre Dame. Never read it. I don't even know if I've ever read anything by Victor Hugo. Unless, did Victor Hugo write Phantom of the Opera? If he wrote Phantom of the Opera, which I think he did, I've read Victor Hugo, but that was the only one, Phantom of the Opera. I've never read Man in the Iron Mask, I've never read The Count of Monte Cristo, and I've never read The Hunchback of Notre Dame. I will. All right, really, I thought this video was going to be a short one today. The 158-Pound Marriage by John Irving. I don't know if John Irving is really considered literature. His books are a little bit too playful, but like I really enjoyed The World According to Garp. I thought that was quite a good book. And A Prayer for Owen Meany, I thought was an excellent book. Not excellent. It was a good book. It's just that every time I read John Irving, A Widow for a Year is another one, I always get a feeling of like, well, I'm not sure that's quite literature. I don't know why. I really don't know why, because it is literature. Prayer for Owen Meany, Widow for a Year, World According to Garp, those are good books. But he does write books that are going to be commercially successful, like Margaret Atwood. But fun to read. You can't deny his books are enjoyable to read. Like, not every book has to be a struggle. It doesn't always have to be a climb up the goddamn side of the mountain. James Joyce, I did a review of this one. I read it for university. I already made a big rant about it, didn't I? And finally, Christopher Isherwood, Mr. Norris Changes Trains. This is a funny edition because this is half of a novel called Berlin Stories, which today you can get the Berlin Stories all in one edition, which I did a review of up here, and you could check that out. And you really should check out the Berlin Story review I did, because that is a great book to read. And this, Mr. Norris Changes Trains, it's half of that. It's the first half. So if you read this one, you're getting the first installment of the Berlin Stories, and that's good. And the second one, I forget what it's called, Goodbye to Berlin. Mr. Norris Changes Trains, 1935, and Goodbye to Berlin, 1939. I like Christopher Isherwood very much, and I really enjoyed reading this book, but I was happy that I also had the second part. You should read Christopher Isherwood. Like, he's a very much neglected American author. I don't know that he wrote very much because he got quite weird into Buddhism or Sufism, or, you know, so he got deep into some alternative spiritual lifestyle. The majority of his writing now that he's dead is mostly translations of this religion that became an enormous part of his life. But it's his fiction that I care about, and I think the world should more care about, unless you're a part of that funny religion that he was a part of. And then, of course, anyway, all of that's... So that is the bookshelf tour number 3. I had not planned to go on that violent vitriolic rant about university professors, but I did. My son is jumping around with my beautiful wife in the other room, and I guess I've just got to turn the camera off and say thank you very much for watching, everyone. Please support me on Patreon, because it really helps me a lot. You know, we live in this really tiny apartment. You want to see the apartment where I live? Like, I'm humiliated to show it to you, but I will. Please consider supporting me on Patreon. Let me show you the dimensions of this place where I live. And don't forget also, I'm making the video right now, which is why it looks the way it does. So there's the passage to the room. There's where I make the videos. There's the sofa. All that stuff hanging on the walls is to deaden the sound, right? Those bed sheets that are hanging in front of is because it gets so unbearably cold here in the winter that we needed some extra layers so that we don't freeze. But even with that, on the windows, there still gets a thick layer of glass ice on the inside of the windows. It gets this cold in this apartment. Ice on the inside of the windows. Okay, all of these sheets, you know, for making the videos. My wife is very kind enough to tolerate my eccentricities for now. There's where we eat dinner, and there's my little workstation. There's the kitchen, all of it. There's, you know, the miscellaneous area. There's a picture of Yukari and me when we were young and we just met, and we were, oh, you know, those happy days of youth. And over there is the front door, and over there is the bathroom, and behind that wall is the bedroom. That is the entirety of where we live. And please donate some money, because we're poor people. And you know how much this apartment costs? Every month, $1,450. This tiny, tiny apartment for 2 adults and a 10-month-old baby. Sometimes when I look around and realize how shitty this is and how expensive, I shouldn't just say I hate Canada, but it's because of the Canadian, you know, like the landlords can charge as much as they want and people just have to tolerate it. And if you can't tolerate it, then you can move to fucking Winnipeg, or you can move to fucking Regina and freeze out there. Because here in New Westminster, British Columbia, tiniest little corner of Canada where the weather is tolerable, they can jack up the prices to what they want. And the landlord, she told me, she said, you know, and when you leave, we're going to increase the price of your apartment by $1,000. It's going to be $2,500 when you leave. She told me that with this big grin on her face when we met in the lift. Imagine telling me something like that, that when you leave that horrible, shitty little apartment, it's going to be almost double for the poor bastards who move in after us. Like, look at those baseboard heaters. This building was built in 1969. She told us, don't look at the dirty laundry. You know, it's just somehow those baseboard heating, somehow I think they're poisoning us. I know that's irrational and paranoid, but I just feel that. So anyway, if you can help, please help. Thanks for watching.